Support for Flying Valiant builds is brought to you by 1st and 64th Customs, where no diecast is safe. Video Geek Productions, all business, all geek. The Brian Smith YouTube channel. Clever schemes for fun and profits. A generous grant from the Jonathan Vonesh Foundation, and from support from viewers like you. Please like, share, and subscribe. Just joined with Justin and Jen for a giant Jeep job. Let's jump to it. Hey there folks, Chuck here, and we've got a double feature today. As you may have noticed, I have a brother who is insanely talented, and his wife is also insanely talented, and they've been highly instrumental in the success of this channel, both from moral support and from actual support with things like the amazing graphics that you see at the beginning of the show, the logo, all the merch, and I had the opportunity to return the favor for them. They were out at an antique store and found these two Hot Wheels Jeep CJ7s and wanted me to do a restoration / customization on them. There was a catch though. They wanted them to be shiny, and that was an interesting challenge for me, seeing as I really haven't done that many shiny builds. But I was honored to have the opportunity to provide them with something cool to go on their shelves and to give them a little thank you for all the ways they've helped me along, both in this channel and through my life. So let's get this gratitude festival rolling with a breakdown. First, they wanted both Jeeps restored to their original colors, more or less. More on that in a minute. They wanted to keep similar graphic schemes. As I said before, they wanted to make them shiny. Jen's Jeep, the green color changer, she wanted to be more of a street Jeep, and Justin wanted his to be more of an off-roader, and he agreed to let me do some mud effects on it, but not make it too muddy. And since I was doing shiny, I figured the least I could do was make them highly detailed. Alright, ready? Punch that subscribe button. Let's boogie. I love doing old black walls like these because they're metal body, metal base, and these ones only had one rivet in the front and 2 tabs in the back. Stripping them was pretty straightforward. The color changers are notoriously difficult to strip, but this one came loose without too much effort and a little wire wheeling. Then it was time to file down the body lines and get to priming. The first color that I chose for my brother's Jeep was called Rich Espresso Metallic. It was a craft paint, and it turned out to be more of a goldy brass color than an actual espresso color. So that didn't work out, and I ended up going back over it with some Testors Extreme Lacquer Metallic Root Beer, and good grief to those paint cans, shoot out a lot of paint. But it covered really well, and I haven't used the Extreme Lacquer paints before, and I can see the appeal. They're very nice to work with. Just be ready for a lot of paint really fast. For Jen's Jeep, the green that I chose was a color I already had in my cabinet called Limeade. It was a craft paint color, and I thinned it out with a little Fantastic. It laid on very nicely, and it was pretty close to the color that the Jeep was when she found it. It's kind of in between the two color changes. I think it was originally supposed to be more of a yellow, and then it would turn to a dark green when it was in cold water. I did one last freezer test on it before I stripped the paint off, and it did still go to the dark green, but not nearly as dark as it used to. I think the paint kind of degrades over time with these. For Jen's Jeep, I did a lighter tan, and for Justin's more of a saddle tan. Because he was doing his Jeep muddy, I started with a burnt umber undercoating. Then I gave both of them a coat of semi-gloss clear to work with before laying on the gloss later. More on that in a minute. I broke out the AK Interactive panel liner for brown and green vehicles. It's essentially black. It's like an extremely dark brown, but it's very nice to work with, lays extremely smoothly, and is very easy to control and clean up afterwards. And I went over all the panel lines just to make sure things stood out. I was glad I did the semi-gloss clear coat before I did this because it made cleanup very easy. Yep, there's a little helper hand. And I think she brought something by for me to look at. Yep, there it was. And it's gone. I did the same panel liner on the interior to get the ribbing in the seats to stand out and a few little details. On Justin's, it's really hard to see because it's so dark, but it did improve the overall image, especially around the grill slots. This is Vallejo Extra Opaque Heavy Charcoal, and it is so nice to work with. It is a very, very dark, very, very flat gray, and it lays extremely well, and it's great for doing black in scale because it's not exactly black, but it looks like how rubber or plastic that's black would look. I did some panel liner around the chassis frames and then used the heavy carbon to pull out some of the darker details on the undercarriage, including the shadows on the skid pad. Jeep bumpers of this era were typically either chrome or gloss black, and on the Golden Eagles, they were more often gloss black than not. And while this did have sort of a custom front end with the winch, I went with gloss black for the bumpers. It's one of the very few times you're ever going to see me use gloss black. But this is a shiny build, and I wanted to have it look true to the full-size vehicle. I can't tell you how old this pot of Tester's paint is. I've had it a very long time. It's at least 15 years old, and it's still kicking. I did a little burnt iron around the sides of the winch and some DSP silver for the winch cabling itself. I will point out here, don't pay too much attention to this chassis on Jen's Jeep. As much as I wanted to do a body color on this one, the more I got into it, the less I liked it. And by the time I was done detailing, I was like, what am I doing? And we'll rectify that a little later. I will say I really liked the overall chassis on these Jeeps. They are very detailed, and there's lots of cool little bits to draw out, both in the drive shafts and the leaf springs and the exhaust pipes and the skid plates. It was a fun chassis to detail, so I didn't really mind doing it again. The only real catch was that the leaf springs do hang really low, like needlessly low. I think it was originally to keep the oversized wheels on the side of the Jeep from bending if they were stepped on or played with rough. But that's not really going to be the issue with these Jeeps, so I ended up taking care of that later, and we'll see that in a bit. The Stewart Simple mirror paint, my favorite secret weapon when it comes to detailing, came in handy for all the lenses and the accent pieces, the headlights. There isn't a lot of chrome on these Jeeps, so I really used it almost exclusively for lenses, but there were little places like the steering wheels and bits of the dash that I could do details on. And I also got to use it on the spare tire to draw out the wheel that's showing under the spare tire cover, which meant I needed to find custom wheels that sort of matched that. I used Tamiya Dark Gray to add a little bit of detail to the cables so that they stood out a little more. These decals are actually from Second Chance Redlines. I bought them before I got my white toner printer, and his decals are excellent. They're very nice to work with, and he had this set up with the Golden Eagle already on it, and it was different from the original Tampo that was on this casting, but I wanted it to look more like a real stock Golden Eagle. So these were perfect for that. And his decals are just really nicely done. They lay super nice. I aspire to have my stuff be as good as his. It's getting there. It's close. I'll have to ask some of my satisfied customers how they feel about my decals. It worked out nice to have this set up all ready to go. I didn't have the graphics for the color changer Jeep, but fortunately my brother is a graphic designer, and he was able to whip these up really quickly and get them to me, and I was able to print them at the exact size that they need to be. There's also a little teaser for my next build in this decal sheet. And then I used a little micro sol to get it to lay nicely on the ridges of the hood. But I wanted to do a little more than just the stock graphics, so I used some 4x4 graphics from the Second Chance Redline decal sheet that I had. I also gave them each his and hers license plates. They're both based out of Tennessee, and they like going to Dollywood, so thought I'd throw a little touch on there for them. And it was at this point in the build I remembered that the windshields are clear and don't have any actual paint on them, so I went back and cleaned them up, masked them off, primered and painted them to match. I was doing 5 builds at a time during this, so I really should have done a better job of writing things down to keep track of them, but I did end up at least finishing all 5 builds and had a minimal amount of pieces left over. Once the mirror paint had set up, I went over it with some Vallejo metallic medium instead of my usual oyster white, just to see how that turned out. And I actually really like how it turned out. It's almost a metallic white in and of itself. So it creates a good illusion of the lens with the outer area creating the illusion of a trim ring. I also used it to paint in the fishing line for the fishing rod that's in the back. I used AK Interactive's Intense Colors to color in the things in the backs of the Jeeps. Because the Jeeps themselves were so bold, I felt like the stuff in the back needed to be bold too. And I tried to mix it up a little bit so the 2 Jeeps had different colored things in the back, but I liked red for the toolbox, so they both got red toolboxes. It was almost time for the clear, but before that I wanted to do the plastic fender trim on the side of the Jeeps, and I know it would seem like I should do that after the clear coat, but I have my reasons and I'll get to that in a minute. And here's where things started to go off the rails. First, I realized that all of that green real estate behind the wheels was going to be very distracting on Jen's Jeep, so I went to paint it the heavy charcoal, and then really didn't have a good place to stop painting the heavy charcoal. Then I did a test fit on the wheels, which I should have done from the get-go, and realized I had not made a large enough channel for the new wheels to go in, so I had to cut that with my Dremel tool. And that turned out to be the same problem with the other Jeep as well. So after a lot of dremeling, a lot of cutting, a lot of colorful, descriptive language, I finally had them to where they would fit. The wheels that I got for her Jeep were from Treads 164, and the wheels that I used for Justin's Jeep were from one of the Green Lake collections, I don't remember which. And by the time I was done with all of this, I realized I really just couldn't stand to look at the bottom of this Jeep any longer, so I had to make a change. There. That's much better. I went over the seats with some matte clear to make them look more like vinyl, and I did the spare tire cover as well. Matte is actually a little bit shinier than the straight paint, so it's a little bit of a misnomer to call it matte finish. It's really more of an eggshell. Then it came time for the most nerve-wracking part of the process, and that was the clear coat, because if it went wrong, all of my detailing and all of my decals were for nothing. I'd heard good things from several builders. I believe Brett at Double B's Customs was one of them that highly recommended the Minwax Fast Drying Polyurethane Clear Gloss, and I was eager to give it a try because I've seen some really good results from it, but I've also had really bad reactions with clear coats in the past, so I did the smart thing this time around and used a test vehicle, and I was quite happy with the results. It didn't craze the paint, and everything had that amazing wet look that I was going for, including the plastic on the side of the Jeeps. Now's where we come back to that part. I wanted the black on the sides to have the same protective coating as the rest of the Jeep, so I decided that I would go over it after the clear coat with some MIG Ammo Ultra Matte varnish, and it was amazing. It almost instantaneously created an ultra matte surface to mimic the plastic on the sides of the Jeep. And I'm happy because I know that those layers of paint where the black meets the green or brown are thoroughly protected under a nice thick clear coat of polyurethane. While I had the ultra matte varnish out, I went over the floors of the Jeeps to make sure that the floors looked not quite like carpeting, but had a different finish to them than the seats. Then it was time for the acrylic stoplight red and turn signal amber, not forgetting the little markers on the side. And I added a little bit of I-beam channel on the front, held in with some super glue to hold the axles in place on the front of the Jeep, because I'd basically butchered the entire front of the Jeep out, and it was too small to put tubing in without cutting it out further, and it was too big to just have it sitting loose. So this little bit of styrene I-beam glued in place did a perfect job of laying close to the channel, but giving it just enough room for the front tires to spin freely. Even with all that work, it was still hard to get the wheels at a decent clearance without looking ridiculous. So I decided the best course of action was to once again break out the Dremel and just cut the leaf springs and touch up the paint afterwards, and I was pretty happy with the final result. It meant that the wheels could sit up a little higher so there wasn't a weird gap between the wheels and the fenders, so I was happy with the final outcome. It was time to snap everything back together, and it actually did almost snap back together. I was really pleasantly surprised with how well these went back together. But, of course, I'm not done. I still need to do some mud. So once I made sure everything fit properly, it's time to get those wheels off and get to mudding. I started with the Tamiya weathering powders, using the mud pastels to rough in where I wanted mud on the Jeep. I used some splattered ground effects from AK Interactive on the tires to soak in between the treads, and then touch them up with my finger to get most of that mud off again, but left the mud effects inside the treads of the tires, and then use those splatter effects to go over the underside of the Jeep to show where mud had been kicked up and bounced all over the chassis from driving through a muddy trail. I took some artistic license here, just so not all of the details would be lost, because again, if a real Jeep goes through mud, the entire bottom is going to be one color. I then took the splatter effects and toothpick with a stiff brush and used that to splatter mud all over the Jeep in areas where mud effects would gather. Then I dabbed some all over the windshield and used a cotton swab to wipe most of it off so that I'd get some nice streaked windshield effects. Then I used the AK Brown Soil Mud and Earth Effects paint to add some thicker stuff around the outside of the Jeep. And then I busted out the heavy stuff. This is Wilder's fine light brown textured earth. It's a very interesting, I don't want to say paint to work with, but it's almost like working with icing, like a gritty, really sugary icing. And it dries out, so you have to use water periodically to revive it, but it does revive very nicely, and it creates fantastic caked mud effects. You just have to be careful with the application so you don't go too heavy. Once I was done with all of the mud and texture effects, I went over the grill openings on the Jeep with a toothpick to scrape all of the mud and debris out, because that black is supposed to represent nothingness, and mud and dirt shouldn't cling to nothing. And I put it all back together and sent Justin a picture. And he said I did too good of a job. It was too muddy. So I took a wet cotton swab and dabbed off some of the Wilder's paint, and he wanted some more slung mud effects. So I went back to the splatter paint and added some streaks along the side. It's something that I'm still learning to work with. It's a lot of slap some paint on, pull some paint off, try again, and then add some splattering on top. And then it was time for the final step, add the official Flying Valiant decal and give them both their numbers. So one more time, let's take a look at what we started with. A couple of antique store Blackwall era CJ7s from Hot Wheels, and here's what we ended up with. One Jeep ready for a rodeo, and one Jeep ready for a rodeo. I was so nervous working on these, and I really tried to do a good job. I'm so scared to death of doing shiny builds, and I really sweat the details on them, but I think they turned out okay. Let me know what you think in the comments below. As always, I'd like to thank my patrons that make these videos possible. Seeing as this is my day gig now, I literally couldn't be doing this without them. You saw the Bandit level patrons at the beginning of this video, but I'd also like to thank Mid-Island Custom Diecast. Thank you, Evan. Please subscribe to his YouTube channel. My amazing wife, Carolyn. The best middle school / high school / college math tutor on Zoom. Maple Leaf Matchbox Makeovers. Thank you, Andrew. Please subscribe to his channel. The Double B's Customs, as I mentioned earlier. Thank you, Brett. Please subscribe to his channel as well. And Gary Tasker. Thank you, Gary. I'd also like to thank my Douglas level patrons, the Good, Bad, Better podcast, Jordan Kleinhenn, the Curtis Crafts YouTube channel, Jim Silva YouTube channel, and the Devil's Details Diecast YouTube channel. Please check everybody's stuff out in the description below, and if they have a channel, please give them a subscribe and tell them I sent you. As I mentioned, I couldn't do this video without my patrons, and if you want early access to my videos, some extra behind the scenes looks, and a whole bunch of other cool stuff, you can visit flyingvaliant.com and find out how you can support this channel. You can buy one of my builds from the videos, obviously not this one, or you can order custom decals or 3D printed parts from me. You can find out more about that by emailing me at flyingvaliant@gmail.com. If you really like what we do, you can check out my brother's amazing TeePublic and Redbubble stores. I'll link to those in the description below, and see not only the merch for this channel, but some amazing custom diecast themed graphics that he's designed, as well as a bunch of other automobilia and pop culture bits of art that he's put together. 100% of the proceeds from that go to him as a thank you for doing graphics for my channel and helping me with my various projects. He just added some new Redline themed art to his channel. Check these out. They are so cool. And he did this amazing Herbie inspired graphic. He does a lot of Herbie the Love Bug graphics. And if you like Herbie, you're going to love what he does. And I hope you like shiny builds, because I've got another triple feature coming up, and it goes in a different direction from this one for sure. So please make sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon. You can get more glamour shots of my builds over on Instagram at Flying Valiant, or you can find Flying Valiant on Facebook and get more behind the scenes info on what I'm working on and what's inspiring me this week. And hey, you know what? I really appreciate you being here. As always, I want to thank you for coming along with me for the ride. So until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.